In 6 days, we have opened over 160 case files, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Federal authorities say the investigation into violence at the U.S. Capitol is picking up speed. Among the latest, the son of a New York judge was released on bond after being charged with felony theft. And Robert Packer, the man seen wearing a Camp Auschwitz shirt, was arrested on charges including violent entry and disorderly conduct.
We've already charged over 70 cases. And again, that number I suspect is going to grow into the hundreds.
It began with arrests for more low-level charges like trespassing and disorderly conduct. Arrests involving some of the most visible suspects.
Those are the cases the public's familiar with. They're familiar with those cases because of social media.
But the most serious charges are soon to come, says Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia.
We're looking at significant felony cases tied to sedition and conspiracy.
The exact charge is seditious conspiracy. It carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. It applies to people accused of plotting to overthrow the government or delay the execution of a law or take possession of government property. Former federal prosecutor Andrew Cherkasky explains.
Sedition itself requires the unique element that you really have to prove that the individual intended to overthrow the government. So that's different than just a trespass or just being in the Capitol building where people were there to cause havoc and mayhem and just to cause the chaos to potentially delay things or whatnot. That those people aren't going to be looking at the sedition charges.
But that's not all that's on the table. There's a wide range of criminal charges being considered.
We're looking at everything from simple trespass to theft of mail, to theft of digital devices inside the Capitol, to assault on local officers, federal officers both outside and inside the Capitol, to the theft of potential national security information or national defense information, to felony murder, and even civil rights excessive force investigations.
Felony murder could apply in the death of U.S. Capitol officer Brian Sicknick.
I think anybody who's committing a felony is looking at the felony murder charges because what was reasonably foreseeable is what's going to dictate whether somebody is or is not engaged in that felonious activity that led to that murder.
As the investigation rolls on, one thing is certain: the scope and scale is unprecedented.
All right, let's bring in Court TV anchor Julie Grant. Julie, great to see you tonight.
Great to see you, Vinny.
Felony murder, we've covered a lot of them. As a matter of fact, the George Floyd case is basically a felony murder case. They don't call it felony murder, but that's what it is. What underlying felonies are we talking about here? Because it seems that the federal statute kind of lays them out very specifically. Which ones do we think could be in play here?
That's a great question, Vinny. And we don't know enough details to say for sure, and the government isn't saying anything yet as nothing has been charged. But best guess here, based on the evidence, probably something like aggravated assault on a police officer. That would be one educated guess we could put forth tonight based on the facts that we know. We know that U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was responding to the riots. We know that he was injured while physically engaging with those protesters. We know that he returned to his division office, and that's where he collapsed. He was then taken to a local hospital there in D.C. and sadly, as we know, succumbed to his injuries. So lots more investigation needing to be done on this one. But as you mentioned, you're absolutely correct, Vinny. The George Floyd case, we're talking about felony murder, even though it's called second-degree unintentional homicide there in Minneapolis. And here, in this case, we're talking about a death that occurred during the commission of a felony. We're not talking about someone setting out to murder a police officer, but that this death occurred perhaps during another felony, like assaulting him, if that's what the investigator determined happened. And I spoke with former federal prosecutor Andrew Cherkasky a little bit about this earlier today. Let's watch.
What we see as a prime example is if a group of people agreed to rob a bank, and in the course of doing so, one person murdered a guard, the entire group of people, that entire conspiracy is looking at a felony murder charge because they had all conspired to go into that bank. We're going to see charges like that in this case for anybody that was around the death of that Capitol police officer and in any way contributed to it while they were engaged in a felony.
So this really is a tough job for these investigators. And to Andrew's point, they're linking individuals, perhaps it wasn't just the actions of one. If they can show, as you know, Vinny, there was action in concert, there could be multiple people potentially facing felony murder charges.
All right. There was also an Olympian, an Olympic champion who was arrested. What can you tell us?
You know, a five-time Olympic medalist, Vinny. Twice he won the gold. We're talking about Cleet Keller. And this information came in late in the day. The news broke that he was charged. He's over there on the left. Charged with 3 counts: obstructing law enforcement, knowingly entering a restricted building, violent entry / disorderly conduct. What's unclear tonight is whether or not he's been taken into custody. But these charges, relatively low-level charges, but of course making big news because he was such a standout. I mean, those 2 gold medals, known by the, 4x200 meter freestyle relay. That's what he became known for, apparently most recently working for a real estate firm in the Colorado area, but he has been charged late this evening as one of those individuals in this mob scene that we're looking at there.
And the acting attorney general did speak out. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We will have no tolerance whatsoever for any attempts to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power on January 20th that our Constitution calls for. We will have no tolerance for any attempts to forcefully occupy government buildings. There will be no excuse for violence, vandalism, or any other form of lawlessness.
So another part of this is, and I heard this in your piece, talking about the plotting and conspiracy. Are there allegations that this thing was planned ahead of time and there was communication going back and forth as to what was going to happen that day?
That's another great question, Vinny. And investigators are really still sorting through all of this. When we heard the FBI, DOJ representatives speaking out about this, they're still actually asking the public for information. They said it was around 170 open case files so far, but so much more to sort through in terms of, you have to identify the individuals, see if there was any communication. They did start the press conference talking about how some of the communication ahead of time was identified. Some individuals were identified ahead of time and pegged as folks who were going to cause trouble, and they were stopped. But you could see so many more people came out. And we can't, as you know this, Vinny, we can't lump everyone into the same group. I have to say, Attorney Alan Dershowitz, I think, said it best. Listening to him talking about classifying the protesters on his podcast, he was saying you could classify some as those who were just peacefully protesting, who did not commit crimes. They were just there exercising their freedom of speech and their First Amendment right to peaceably assemble. And then you have those who trespassed, a more low-level offense, but still a crime. And then you have those very violent rioters who wreaked such havoc and committed multiple crimes. And, and to your point, conspiracy, this could be part of it. We heard talk of, seditious conspiracy could be something that these federal investigators are looking to potentially charge individuals with, but it has to be so specific. There has to be that key intent element that Andrew Cherkasky was talking about, that there was this intent to overthrow the government, this intent to stop the execution of the law. It's very, very specific. So it can't just be, hey, we wanted to go and wreak havoc and create chaos. That is just simply not enough for seditious conspiracy. So we shall see what happens, but so much to sort through. This isn't going to be over anytime soon, but I think it will be months and months and months, and we will keep hearing about more and more people. We know there were grand jury presentments in D.C. as recently as yesterday, and this is going to be the norm. It's going to keep on going, and the DOJ has to still look ahead, as you heard Jeffrey Rosen say, to potential protests happening again on Inauguration Day.
It's interesting, and I want to kind of put together our first 2 stories here. In some strange way, if investigators and prosecutors in this case can uncover planning and plotting and conspiracy ahead of time to do what happened, the defense of the president during the impeachment trial could probably use that, because that would be a defense to inciting a riot if it was planned before the speech.
That's a great point. You're so brilliant. I say that to you all the time, and it's true. You really are. I never thought about that, and potentially it could be. I mean, maybe, certainly. I mean, and we know, I just, listened to all the reporting that Michael did with you moments ago on the show. And there are so many different factions and so many different voices out there. And the other day, and I would encourage our viewers, take a look and take in it all and listen to all of the opinions and make your own judgment. But we heard Alan Dershowitz speaking very matter-of-factly about how that speech by the president is protected speech. And the rules for incitement of violence are very, very specific, and that this did not come close to rising to that level, in his opinion, that it was protected. And the Supreme Court has held that far worse has been protected. And to your point, certainly if this goes to a trial before the Senate, that may be something that could come into play as to whether or not these individuals just acted alone, acted ahead of time, and it had nothing to do with what was said that day.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and obviously Court TV will be covering it all. Thank you so much, Julie Grant, Court
Thank
TV
you kindly,
anchor.
Vinny.